Okay, welcome everybody. Fantastic to see you here for our first seminar presentation for this semester. We're starting with a very special guest. Special because of his stature in his field, which is Javanese literature, but also special because of his history with our program. So Stuart was a supervisor at my MA here, and he's been the director of our Indonesian program for a while too. So the genealogies are all in place. I want to also welcome Hadi Sidomulyo, who is Stuart's collaborating scholar in this recent work, Kidung Pañji Margasmara. And it's terrific to have you here as well, speaking for us, Hadi, on the toponymical aspects of this work, which is a fascinating area of study and important. I also want to welcome Melinda. Thank you very much for helping us with the thing. And I also want to welcome Jana Satrawan, the scholar from Sydney, who's currently in Georgia. The field today is Javanese studies, Javanese literature, which we have quite a good connection with in our program because Jacinta Coronasi, of course, is a native speaker of Javanese. Howard Mans is a staff member who studied a lot of Javanese, and I'm sort of involved in the field of Javanese studies as well by having studied Sundanese for quite a while. Sundanese is the language of the western province of the island of Java, and the other provinces are basically more or less Javanese speaking over very complex linguistic communities. And so we're talking probably about, in present, Stuart, would you say 85 million maybe speakers, 90 million speakers? Something like that?
A very rough estimate, yes.
A very rough estimate. We're talking about a huge linguistic community with a lot of diversity within it. Stuart was a graduate of Sydney University and studied, in fact, took Japanese there at Sydney University. But he then moved into Javanese studies and completed his dissertation, which is entitled One Bangunaya, at Leiden University in the Netherlands in 1971. And after that, he had a very interesting career, Stuart. He had a job as the lexical assistant on the compilation of the famous Javanese Kawi dictionary. Am I right here, Stuart?
Old Javanese English.
Old Javanese English dictionary, which was being made by the Jesuit scholar Father Sidomulyo in Yogyakarta at that time. And eventually Stuart ended up teaching here and leading our Indonesian department for a while. He took his opportunity, the resignation for Stuart was an opportunity to lift his level of scholarly activity, and he's been working like a madman since then. In the last couple of years, we've seen an enormous amount of work done, including this recent publication by Brill, which is our topic for today. So, Stuart, can I hand it over to you, please? And then after you, we'll hear from Hadi, who is currently in
Bali.
In Bali.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Julian. Let's make a quick start. The aim of today's seminar is to introduce this new publication, which is titled Kidung Pañji Margasmara, which you can see there, edited by me, Stuart Robson, with a historical and topographical commentary by Hadi Sidomulyo. This was published by the venerable publisher Brill, BRILL, in the Netherlands, in Leiden, in this year, 2023. It actually appeared late in 2022, and due to a problem with the distributors, it only became available earlier this year. Brill has been around since, I think, 1693, so it has a long reputation with classical and humanities studies. Now let's say in the book, so it exists, there you go. So this is a contribution to Indonesian studies in general, not in the sense of Indonesian, that is Bahasa Indonesia, but another Indonesian language, namely Javanese, which has a considerable literature termed Old, Middle and Modern. So this is a literary study placed within an interesting historical setting. The book consists of two parts. Part one is the text and English translation on opposite pages, so you can refer backwards and forwards if you like, with a longish introduction, plus other apparatus, such as a full list of textual variants and textual notes, while part two is an extensive commentary dealing with the historical and topographical aspects. First, the language. I'd like to talk about that for a moment. This can be categorized as Middle Javanese. In other words, within the history of Javanese literature, it can be placed between old and modern. You can compare the situation with Old, Middle and Modern English, for example. This means that it's written in a literary idiom that will not be familiar to contemporary speakers of Javanese. After all, the language has changed a lot over the centuries. The earliest example of Old Javanese, for example, dates from the second half of the 9th century and early 10th century. It's a full version of the epic Ramayana. And that tradition continued for many centuries. Next, the genre. As you can see from the title up there, the work belongs to the genre of the Kidung, K-I-D-U-N-G, Kidung. This means that it's a long narrative in poetical meters. The general type of meter used here is termed tamahan, which features double stanzas, so A and B, with a fixed number of syllables and a fixed final vowel. So, for the bulk of this work, we have stanzas of 55 ending in I, 55I, 31I, 31I. You've got to count them all. There are a number of these different patterns. The word Kidung has a second meaning, namely song, because poetry is intended to be sung. So the textual and musical aspects go together. And there is, or was, a tradition of accompanying the singing on a musical instrument, the gambang, which is a xylophone. Can we hear the gambang? There it is. It's one now. You can't hear the singing very clearly, unfortunately, in this recording, but you can hear the gambang clearly enough. A number of such kidungs exist, with only a few available in printed form. Now a word about the edition in here. Edition refers to the process of presenting the text in a readable form. The first step is to locate the available sources and then compare them together. The aim of this is to find the relationship between them and see whether there are obvious errors, and finally to decide which readings are best, that is, most likely to represent the correct text. This is necessary because the text may have been disturbed over the centuries in the course of being recopied an unknown number of times. The text should be grammatically and metrically correct. This involves counting every syllable and noting any apparent errors in the list of variants. This is what we call a critical edition. That brings me to the actual sources. The sources are manuscripts, that is, handwritten books. The originals are probably all written on palm leaf, called lontar. So a stack of such leaves is called a lontar. For this kidung, we don't have the lontar originals, but copies made on paper. The originals were, or probably still are, kept in collections in Bali. Yes, Bali, not Java. So the script is Balinese script. We have an example here somewhere on page 1 of such a manuscript. You see that? On the front cover you can see that. The manuscripts of the Kidung Pañji Margasmara are kept in the Leiden University Library. and some are from the collection of the scholar H.N. Fondertuk, who lived in North Bali in the 19th century, compiling a large dictionary. So after his death, his papers arrived in Leiden in 1894. So I mentioned Bali. This is important. This brings us to an interesting fact of cultural history. After the end of the 15th century, Java was Hindu and Buddhist. Then Islam arrived in Java. But in the meantime, Bali also possessed a Hindu culture, partly inherited from Java, and Bali is still Hindu to this day. As a result, Bali preserved a proportion of the literary works of Java. Balinese scholars faithfully and accurately copied the manuscripts, so we have them to thank for the preservation of Old and Middle Javanese literature. The term used in Bali for this literature is Kawi, K-A-W-I, Kawi. The Balinese are very proud of its heritage as it expresses their Hindu values and traditions. Now a word about the author. It's a most unusual circumstance. The author gives his name, which is Kemuningrat Jahatapingrati. I only can think of one other example of Kidung where the author mentions his own name. This rather long name seems to mean blanket of the world, a young noble who performs austerities in the city. A little bit pretentious. So he calls himself Jah, which could be a young woman or a young man, but of noble birth. I think definitely a man, not a woman, from the way he describes gender relations. His name is not known from anywhere else. Now, the date. Another very unusual feature is that the poem opens with the date of composition. This is expressed in what seems to be what we call a chronogram, that is, words with numerical values. This gives us the date Shaka 1380. Now, Shaka is the era that was used in Hindu Java and still in Bali. If you convert that, you get AD 1458. 1458. So this places us towards the end of the Hindu period in Java, when the capital was at Majapahit, a spot now called Trawulan, south of Surabaya in East Java. Ruins can still be seen there, if you care to go along and have a look. The title. In Margasmara, we see a compound of two words, namely Marga, way, road or travel, and Smara, love. This sums the story up, because we have plenty of both. Pañji Margasmara is also the name of the main character. Pañji is a title. It has nothing to do with the well-known tales called Pañji stories, because it doesn't share the same structural traits. The story has been about his adventures, of course in association with the beautiful Candrasari. We read how they got together, were separated, and then finally were reunited and married. And now, the story. At last, you've been wondering what it's all about. In the course of their journeying, the couple passed through many places, the names of which are given, and many of them can still be traced. This is one of the interesting aspects. Topography is Hadi's department, so I'll leave the discussion about him. A little bit more about the story. The story starts with the news that Pañji Margasmara had only been married for 2 months to the daughter of the Pati, or Prime Minister of Majapahit, when she suddenly died. In shock, he went off unseen to wander the countryside. Finally, he came to the Taman Warapsari, which translates as Garden of the Nymphs, where, as fate would have it, the family of the Adipati, or governor of Singhasari, and family were visiting. Pañji Margasmara and Candrasari's eyes met. Her parents were about to marry her off to a cousin by the name of Kidung Margasmara, but she detested him. Well, with the connivance of Sidomulyo, which means firefly, who is Candrasari's maid, they met that night in the garden with predictable results. Pañji Margasmara was detected making off over the wall and had to flee. Candrasari's father was furious, but failed to find the culprit. Interestingly, this garden still exists in the area of Kidung, which is just north of Singhasari, north of Monash, although much decayed. In 1359, Hayam Wuruk, the then king of Majapahit, visited there, like a picnic area, while he was on tour through East Java. Without wanting to give too much away, Pañji Margasmara went to consult the grandmother, or Nini, of Candrasari, which is a hill a few kilometres east of Singhasari, and she predicted, as a supernatural figure, that they would marry, and advised him to head for the hermitage of Kidung. He promised to have Candrasari perform a special dance if he succeeded. There followed details of his journey on foot southwards, trying to find Kidung. Meanwhile, the Adipati and family prepared to attend a religious centre called Kuku on the southwest slopes of Mount Semeru. After doing this, someone suggested they should go a bit further, southwards, down to the coast, to admire the rugged scenery. And this is how the lovers managed to meet again and elope in a westerly direction, crossing terrifying ravines and watercourses. Finally turning north, they crossed a big river and headed in the direction of Pala, now called Penataran. And this is where Pañji Margasmara met the young king, was reunited with his mother, and introduced his beloved Candrasari to them. The next question was how to be reconciled with her father, not to mention the disappointed Jalan Marina. Well, there's probably enough detail to give you a feeling for the story. Next, cultural background. The Kidungs are well known for their descriptions that they give of court life. Seeing that we know the time and probable place where this example was written, the question arises as to what extent the descriptions can be applied to Singhasari in the relevant period. The story is not history as such, but it's close to what you might call a historical novel. The main actors are members of the elite, but the servants also play an important role. Both characters have their female servants and could not manage without them. The preoccupations are those of the elite. This is why we have detailed descriptions of what people were wearing, names of the garments, the patterns, fabrics, some reported, colours, not to mention all the jewellery. Fashions must have changed, but just imagine, if you were, a Balinese dancing girl in full costume, something like that. So, who carries the baggage, containing numerous changes of clothes, not to mention washing and drying them in the forest? Well, have a guess. As a footnote, we notice there are no terms in the story for footwear. I have to conclude that even the noble characters went barefoot. That is, when they were not being conveyed by ox cart. The Javanese of this time and class were great admirers of nature, and obviously the journey through the forests and fields is a fine opportunity to mention the flowering trees and vines. And the coast on the Southern Ocean is very impressive, where the waves break over the rocks. The beach is a place to amuse oneself. There are many terms in this variety of Javanese that refer to wandering in order to enjoy the beauties of nature and be inspired to write poetry about it. There's another footnote. it's obviously not in accordance with poetical convention to mention the unpleasant aspects of nature, such as the mosquitoes, biting ants, or spiders. However, there is a clear reference to tiger tracks in the wilderness where Pañji Margasmara is walking. The term there for tiger is pohon, not lachan as in modern Japanese. Perhaps a different term for the same animal, or perhaps even another species, who knows, but they are definitely there. Now, probably related to this interest in nature, we have gardens and parks attached to the palace. The terms for these are taman and udyana, and these parks have bathing places, often used as places for ladies to stay. And I describe all these in some detail in the introduction. Further, the Kidungs have written descriptions of performances and music. Unfortunately, much of the terminology is obscure. Perhaps further research might clarify matters. Another example is the Kidung Pañji Margasmara, which was published and translated in 1971. We also have descriptions of performances as held at the court. In many Javanese works, we find accounts of fierce battles, but in the Kidung Pañji Margasmara, there are no wars, battles, or even murders. Of course, there's sadness and tears, plenty of tension, and in the end, the emphasis is on reconciliation and the best way to achieve that without injuring people's feelings. Yes, there is a happy ending. Pañji Margasmara is appointed the new party Prime Minister. He's very skillful at his task as such, and Candrasari as a baby girl. In relation to this outcome, we need to have a clear understanding of who's who, that is, the kinship relations between all the main actors. And these relations are key as to how they behave and relate to each other, a preoccupation of Javanese society even today. It's a fruitful field of further study would be the subject of gender relations in connection with the manner in which males and females are associated. A fine study by Helen Crease in 2004 called Women in the Kakawin World gives us insight into the way marriage is depicted in another genre, the Kakawin, and probably something similar applies to the Kidung. Was it pure romance, or was there an element of forceful persuasion? For a deeper understanding of this work, we need to delve further into the spiritual world, as the religious beliefs and practices of the Javanese in this period were very important for appreciating the thought world or ideology which propels the story forward. Religious settlements of various kinds, such as the Pangabadan, where the couple were well received by the guests as guests, dot the landscape. They're everywhere. And now, just moving on to the translation. Fortunately, I had some experience with editing and translating this kind of work in the dissertation at Leiden, as Julia mentioned, from 1971. Then later, in about 1977, I returned to the library in Leiden in search of more data on Kidungs and found some remarkable examples, including the Pañji Margasmara, Singhasari, and Witaraga. This resulted in an article called Notes on the Early Kidung Literature, which included summaries of those three, that were interesting in they all seem to contain place names and details that placed them in the Majapahit period rather than later in Bali. So in 2014, Hadi took this up and wrote an article in his excellent Indonesian on the possible historical background of the Kidung Pañji Margasmara. Meanwhile, I made several abortive attempts over the years to begin an edition and translation of this work. So it was Hadi's interest that inspired me to push on. The year 1982 saw the publication of Professor P.J. Zumwalder's Old Javanese English Dictionary, which represented a great leap forward for Old Javanese studies. He included Middle Javanese works as well, but not the Kidung Pañji Margasmara. As a result, we have the advantage of excellent guidance for many works, but not for others. While attempting the translation, I repeatedly had to put in the note, not NZ, and had to look elsewhere for meanings. Unfortunately, a number of the problems could be solved by consulting the new Javanese Romance book by the late Rob Bada, 2014, a very complete and accurate source for modern Javanese in 2 volumes, but with a slight drawback of being rather opaque Dutch. I enjoy researching difficult words. In a few cases were successful. I'll just give a few examples and then finish up. I came across the word asarira. This is a verb, which you see from the prefix a. It occurs several times. It appears to contain the noun sarira, a Sanskrit-derived word meaning body. However, in every place it means to bathe. How strange. Is it perhaps from asuchi sarira, to purify the body? No evidence of that. Probably it's a quirk of this author. I think it's being a bit original, not found elsewhere. Another word is grantmara, very strange looking word. From the context, it must mean road. No derivation known, but found once in another work. Now here's a good one. Anagara. This one had been puzzled for a long time. It's nothing to do with nagara, meaning city or state. It's clearly a verb, prefix a. Then it dawned on me, it's comparable to amasir, my base word pasir, a verb meaning to go to the seashore. Sure enough, this fits, as this is a nasalization of sagara, means ocean. Thus it means to go to the ocean. And that's exactly what the local body do, right down to the south coast of Java. But in a few other places I was stumped. For example, in 1629a, we read Arambil Urang Lan Sanu Atut Pingarim Kali, collecting prawns and sanu along the banks of the river. The word Urang is clear, that's the prawn, but sanu, not found anywhere. Clearly a creature that lives in mountain streams. But Hadi made inquiries from his informants in the field, an excellent man, but came out empty-handed. A mystery. One more. In 311b and 1525a, we find the word champagi, which from the context refers to a particularly delicious food, but I found nothing to explain what it is. And so on. Finally, one reflects that in a couple of decades, the sophisticated culture and society of Indo-Java will be swept away, with the capital Majapahit overrun by the forces of Islam. Remarkable thought to ponder. Now it's time to hand over to Hadi, who will provide more information from his vast store of data on Javanese history and topography in early East Java, with some lovely photos. Thank you. Come in for Hadi.
Okay. Hello, Hadi, you there? Okay. Let's have a look.
Right, I'm here.
Terrific. Well, would you like to commence your presentation? We have the image here of a map showing the route followed by Pañji Margasmara to Singhasari.
Just put my video, start video. Yeah, I'd like to start with some, first of all, thanks Stuart for a very excellent presentation there. I think I would just like to start with some general comments. I haven't really prepared anything. I was expecting, in fact, to be answering questions, but I'll see what I can do the best I can. before we get on to the present slides, just make a few general comments. I hope this isn't it's not too specialized for the audience, but the first thing I'd like to mention is that I'd like to start with talking about the title of the work, Kidung Pañji Margasmara. Stuart mentioned that, of course, this is not a Pañji story. Although there are similarities, this is an interesting point. What I would like to term the mainstream Pañji stories is the stories probably as a literary genre. They seem to be a little bit later. The theme of separation, reunion, journeying. The Pañji Margasmara is also full of gambling. Pañji Margasmara himself has a predilection for gambling, and these are all themes which appear in the Pañji tradition. We see similarities. On the other hand, there are notable differences, of course, and this doesn't belong to the mainstream Pañji tradition. There's no mention of Daha, and Candrasari is from Singhasari, and Pañji Margasmara is from Majapahit. So, of course, it's quite there's some large differences. And another very major difference, point which interests me personally, is that it's this remarkable coherence in the narrative that you don't find in the mainstream Pañji stories. There's an extraordinary attention to chronological detail. We can follow these figures, we can follow Pañji Margasmara and Candrasari on their journey on a daily basis. In that way, we can follow them from village to village, and thereby we can test the credibility of their journey in the theme of drink. This is what I've attempted to do. The story, in fact, we can calculate it. The story unfolds over the course of a year. It begins with Pañji Margasmara's first marriage, and that we can calculate happened in the month of Waisak, which is April or May, and it ends with the royal marriage. And Bubat and Pañji Margasmara's appointment as Hadi, that happens in Cheka of the following year in March, April. So it's almost exactly a year. And this can be verified. And this combination of this remarkable attention to chronology, then further accentuated through the skillful use of natural imagery. There's one particular image I would like to mention. For example, there's a point when Pañji Margasmara, when he wants to go and visit Candrasari in her lodging in the palace, he's prepared some gifts for her. But before he hops over the wall to meet her, he's given the gifts by his servant. And it says, it's a girdle and a bracelet. And this girdle and bracelet are lit by stars. This is the image. They're lit by the stars, and then they go into the bed. But then he meets Candrasari, and then they go into the fragrant red chamber after the moon has risen. Now, this is exactly. This tells you exactly when this occurred. It happened on the 22nd of Suji, 1 week after the full moon, because the moon would not have risen until, at that time, on that day, it would not have risen until about 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening. So this imagery, I found this quite wonderful. The imagery fits exactly. This would not have been lost on the audience. We're very aware when the moon rises, when it sets, the natural conditions and the imagery of these jewels being lit by the stars is an indication that the moon, of course, has not yet risen. From that you can estimate the day in which it occurred, and it does in fact fit perfectly because they met 7 days earlier. It's just funny thing. Anyway, taken together, and once again, taken together, all these factors combined, they convinced me that the dating of the Pañji Margasmara is correct. It's not a work, although it was copied, we know that it was copied in Bali at a much later date. It is still, this is of course a work for the linguist to decide. I'm not a linguist. The contents of the story, I focused, I believe we have, there are very good reasons. It convinces me that this work was written when it was stated openly. There's no reason to doubt that. The author himself was clearly intimately acquainted with the places mentioned. This is also another strong argument. It's unlikely that an 18th century Balinese scribe would have been familiar with the places described in the story. With regard to the identity of the poet, Stuart has already mentioned this Kamuling Rat Jahat Engraji. This suggests to me that Kamuling Rat is reminiscent of the ancient kings of Singhasari. There is a Samini Rat, this is a title, born by one of the kings of Singhasari. I have the feeling that Kamuling Rat was actually perhaps a member of the ruling family in Singhasari, a descendant from the ancient kings. The element Candrasari suggests both further that he regarded his work as a sacred duty, and his aim was to preserve a living tradition. It's not recreating Majapahit. He was actually experiencing it and living it, and his aim was to preserve it. And he did this. This is when Stuart also mentioned earlier, back in 2014, I tried to investigate whether this was actually telling of actual events which occurred. That's in the historical narrative. And now, after looking more closely at it and reading right through the text, I think that there are allusions to real events. And this was the purpose of the author, was to preserve this living tradition by alluding to well-known people, places, and events. So it's fiction, but it also calls to mind the greatness of Majapahit in the 14th century, especially during the age of King Hyangwuruk and his party Majapahit. These two figures perhaps are reflected in Pañji Margasmara himself and the young king. So there are historical clues. We get clues that perhaps the Kidung Pañji Margasmara contains elements which can help to shed light on the history of the period. So it's not historical text, but it contains elements which can help us to explain the history of the period. So I think I'll just take two examples. Two main settings in the Kidung Pañji Margasmara are Singhasari and Pala, which became the state temple of Majapahit. These are the two places. So that's the first slide. I can't see it very clearly, but this is on the screen here. Singhasari. This map just shows the route, Pañji Margasmara's route. So he leaves Majapahit, he wanders through the hills, and of course he's drawn to Singhasari. That's where he ends up. And he goes to stay in the Taman Margasmara. Perhaps we could just see now on the first 2 or 3 slides of this. This is the first place he passes, one of the places he passes. It's still a well-known landmark. It's called Budon, Hill of Budon. It's north of Singhasari. In the text, it's called Budon. and it's known also from Kapancha's Desa Warnana as Wedwa. And so this is the next map. This is in the town of Candrasari. Stuart showed a photograph earlier. This is a photograph from 1938. This shows a statue of Vishnu on Garuda. We discovered that. I don't know, not sure what happened. It's no trace of it as far as I know. And this is another photograph of Stuart and myself and Peter Worsley at Taman Margasmara in 2019. So this is where Pañji Margasmara stayed. And so, in terms of the next one, this is the Middle Javanese where Pañji Margasmara fled after being found out by his prospective father-in-law, his later father-in-law, acquaint. And these are archaeological remains at foot of Middle Javanese. This is evidence that there was something there, whether this is from the Pineapple Town or we can't be certain, but there are archaeological remains at the foot of the hill. This is another place visited. This corresponds quite closely with the Desa Warnana. These are mentioned in other texts, such as the Desa Warnana, the Buren. This is like the bathing place that one did still exists. These are all places in the region of Singhasari. Now, and Kidung Pañji, this is another place visited after Pañji leaves Singhasari and he goes south. And Candrasari also, they passed by the temple of Kidung, or they must call it Kidung, but these are the historical or the archaeological remains of this Kidung. Now, this comes out of the historical interest. Where was the Calipate in the 15th century? Usually when people think of Singhasari, they think of the Singhasari period, the 13th century. Of course, our author is talking, if to be consistent here, we have to believe that he was describing the Kraton as it existed in the century. And this presumably was the Kraton which was visited by King Hadi in 1359. It was therefore it was not the Kraton. And we have a clue as to where this Kraton actually was. Because in the Desa Warnana, in High Muruk, it says in the Desa Warnana that the king headed for the royal sanctuary at the palace of Singhasari to lodge there. And of course the Raja Dharma which King Hadi visited is the same Dharma which is, I believe, the same Dharma which is mentioned in Pañji Margasmara. Now this Dharma this Dharma was situated on the eastern side of the Kraton. Now this, here we have now, people, I don't know who's familiar with this, this is Chinese Singhasari itself. This is clearly not the Dharma which is described in the Kidung Pañji Margasmara. To begin with, it's unfinished. And if you read in the book in the Pararaton, Chinese Singhasari was actually not completed until about 17 years after the Ronggolongi incident, which happened in 1295. So this temple, Chinese Singhasari itself, was very probably a temple built by Kidung Pañji, who of course had already died. For this reason, the temple was never finished. So we should not identify this Singhasari with the Dharma of the Kidung Pañji Margasmara. For good reasons, place it in further south. That map, the map earlier, a place called Acquaint. It's about 800 meters south of Singhasari. This is another temple. There are several temples in the area. They all disappeared. The only one that survived is Singhasari. This is a wonderful picture from that one earlier. One just these are all images drawn in 1845. The painter H.M. Seaburn. Fortunately, very fortunately, it's all the only images we have of these temples. This one now, this is the temple. In my opinion, this is the temple, which is the Dharma described in Kidung Pañji Margasmara. Its position is directly east of what is now a mosque. Interestingly, this in a place called Acquaint, it's 800 meters south of Singhasari. The mosque itself is called Masjid Bunko, which is very interesting because Bunko, of course, if you ask people why this mosque is called Bunko, it's named Masjid Bunko, it's because the original, the first Muslims who came and lived in Singhasari, actually, this is where they lived. And they called it Bunko because when the Hindu community saw these Muslims praying, they would see them, they were Bunko, which means they would be bowing down. And they got this name, Bunko. This was the name that was given to the mosque. And the mosque is actually built on ancient pillar supports. And archaeological excavations which were conducted at this site, the early years of this century, have shown that this was a residential area for the nobility. I would go a step further and say this is the Hadi, and it's now occupied by the Masjid Bunko. On the eastern side of it, you have the temple. They call the Jambi Utri. This is where the famous image of the Prashti Paramita preserved in the National Museum of Jakarta. So it could be that's the remains of Jambi Utri, and some you can see them there in local residents. They've preserved a few stones. There's another one on the next picture also. Yes, this is the remains. You can still find the remains of the temple. The rest is under the ground. So obviously more research is needed, but this is just one example of how Kidung can perhaps provide information about the position of the Kraton of Singhasari and of course more research. Now we can move on to Penataran. I did discuss this actually in a recent seminar on Pañji, but it's very important, so I think it's worth discussing again. One of the central features of the story concerns the appointment of a new king, this young king who Pañji Margasmara meets at power. And the author informs us that the inaugurations, the young king come to power to be inaugurated. And the inauguration learned that the inauguration was accomplished in 2 stages. So this is perhaps telling us something about how Majapahit kings were inaugurated in the 14th century. This photograph, this is the place, the royal Penataran, place where the king was inaugurated. first stage of the inauguration of Parliament. Site it's called Balai Kambang, and this is could well be the place where the king stayed, and this is where he entertained Pañji Margasmara. Now the date on this Miller's report is extraordinary because the date coincides precisely with Ayamuruk's inauguration. This would seem to be incontestable, providing contestable evidence that this was built by King Ayamuruk. But it could well be that the Kidung Pañji Margasmara is actually informing us of the process whereby kings royalty were inaugurated in the 14th century. It's incontestable this date not be been built by anybody else except for King Ayamuruk that year. And so the Pañji Margasmara, the Kidung is telling us about an event, it's recording or alluding to the event which occurred, famous event occurred in 1350. That is in fact strengthened by the fact that King Ayamuruk himself then was married. Of course, the aborted marriage of Upat, which we read about in Maharatam, in the Pañji Margasmara, the king is also inaugurated at Upat. That's at the time of his marriage.
Hadi is the chair speaking. Given that we're approaching the end of our allotted time, and I think some people might have some questions, I might interrupt you here and ask, would you be so kind as with Stuart perhaps to answer any questions that our colleagues might have? Thank you very much.
Yes.
Please, Jeremy.
First of all, congratulations. Major work, obviously, with lots of significant technical challenges, which have time, obviously, to go into historical and literary significance. Expert, so very big picture and maybe misdirected. Apologies in advance. The first one is a translation from a work in Middle Javanese, but it occurs to me that this is actually another of a series of translations which have occurred across different media and different languages over a number of centuries. You said that this is originally in a song tradition, a work in a sung tradition, written in Middle Javanese, transcribed into Balinese script, and now translated into English as well. So I've just observed it raises interesting questions. It's another of these texts that problematizes the idea of an original and a translation. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was interesting. The question, which is not related to that, but is a question about Middle Javanese. You mentioned that called Middle Javanese as opposed to Old Javanese or Modern Javanese, in the same way that English is, or European languages are discussed in that way. That idea for European languages is bound up a lot in the idea of modernity and the modern. And I'm just wondering how well that sort of division actually works in the case of Javanese. I know it's a useful way of dividing things up, but does it actually work in sort of terms of periodization?
Yes, Middle Javanese, as we've got it in the poetical forms, is a literary idiom. It's definitely not the spoken language of the time. There are traces of the spoken language when maids are talking to each other, and that's particularly difficult to translate. I've probably missed the mark a few times there. And there's renewal in the language in the Majapahit period because a lot of new vocabulary came in. We don't know from where. And so the tradition of writing these songs down was probably quite early, I think, before Majapahit. And They continued that tradition in Bali after the transfer of Hindu civilization to Bali. And so it's one continuous tradition with successive steps forward to what you call modernization. But there's no trace of Islam in this Kidung literature, not one single word derived from Arabic, as far as I can see. So it's still very clearly rooted in 15th century.
Thank you. Beautiful storytelling. That's how I perceive it as a native Japanese who have been thinking about those days and trying to reconnect with life. My question, small question, is the spelling. So I saw two different, for example, Singhasari. In Pak Hadi's slide, I saw O.
Yes,
And in your slides, I saw A.
Yes.
I think we had a discussion a long time ago. I can't remember. I remember that you have a very strong position about this. Do you think it's a big deal because some Indonesians tend to actually use O instead of A?
yes.
Do you think we need explanation of that and why? And I'd like to hear your both position on this.
Yeah, I can explain that. We have two different spellings here. The spelling in the text is Singhasari, and we assume that the pronunciation at that time was with A. The pronunciation with O is comparatively modern in Java, and so the spelling that was shown in the slides, that is imitating the current Indonesian spelling for place names. It's pronounced Singhasari, not Singhasari. It's completely different sounds, isn't it? R and O as well. So that explains the discrepancy there. The Balinese might pronounce the Kidung text quite differently. With the sound as well. So we have our own conventions.
Thank you.
Any other questions there? If not, I'm going to say thank you very much, Stuart, and thank you very much to Hadi as well, and thank you for all those in attendance, and thank you, Diana, for a terrific talk. And I wish you all the best with this one, Stuart, and the next work. I'm sure you're busy working with something else at this point in time.
Yes, unstoppable.
Unstoppable, exactly. So thank you all. I hope to see you again here next Wednesday. And thank you very much to Hadi from Bali. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.